Our next speaker is Rob Hilton. As president of HF&H Consultants, Rob has helped a lot of local jurisdictions, including mine, with their solid waste and recycling programs. And what his clients want to know now, clients in California anyway, is how do we comply with SB 1383? So Rob's here to tell us how.
So I have 10 minutes to do a 20-minute slide deck. So I amped up on coffee right before, and I'm going to fly through this thing. I'm going to try and do about half of the time just high level. Here are the requirements of 1383. There's 83 pages of that, so I'm not going to hit every point. But I'm going to try and spend the other 5 minutes or so talking about how is this being implemented as we're working with agencies who have contracts coming up and they need to anticipate 1383. What are they doing in their contracts? And I've got a couple of case studies. So here comes the speed dating. So we all know 1383 is trying to get 75% of organics out of landfills by 2025, right? Yep, and I'll use the mic. How are we going to do that? Well, CalRecycle is developing the regulations right now. By 2022, you're going to have programs and inspections, education and outreach, monitoring, and a whole lot of reporting. By 2024, you're going to have to implement a fine-based enforcement system on generators. And hopefully, all of that activity will get us to the 2025 goal of 75% organics recovery and 20% edible food recovery. So, what is CalRecycle asking you as an agency to do? A bunch. Got to provide a program to all of your generators, not just the 1826 generators that you're paying attention to right now. You need to inspect for contamination and participation. You need to enforce that they are participating and that they're complying with the rules. You need to provide for edible food recovery. That's a whole new world for most of us. You need to educate generators about all of these things. As a local agency, for some reason not state agencies, but as a local agency, you're going to have to buy recovered California-generated organic waste products, a bunch of them. And you're going to have to implement supportive ordinances and policies. And oh, by the way, CalRecycle is going to make you report on all of this, a lot. So, how do you get there? Ooh, those wrapped in a funny way, didn't they? They've given you three primary compliance options in terms of your program. You can have a 1-container system or a 2-container system, both of which require high diversion organics processing. You have to get 75% of the organics out of the mixed stream. That is very hard. The facilities that are the most advanced in the state are saying they cannot achieve this standard yet. CalRecycle is given another compliance methodology, and that's a 3-container or more segregation system. It's very typical to what you see in the Fantastic 3 program in San Francisco and what you see throughout Alameda County. But you have options to, for example, separate your food from your yard trimmings because local markets in certain places demand that. All right, let's move on. Another fun wrapping. So you're going to have to inspect and enforce. The good news is your annual protocol is a desktop review of all your 2 cubic yard plus generators. So you can look and see who's not subscribing and follow up with those people from a desk review. You don't actually have to go out to every account. You need to do quarterly route reviews to monitor contamination. You need to physically inspect edible food generators, Tier 1 by 2022, Tier 2 by 2024, and food recovery organizations. Lastly, you need to respond to complaints. So if a tenant in a building says, my property manager is not providing recycling service, you need to go and follow up and enforce on them. Through January 1 of 2024, you will be allowed to just issue notices of violation. If you choose to do that, you can go further. But by January 1 of 2024, you need to have a monetary fine associated with the system. And I need to move on. Jurisdictions, as I said, are going to have to procure a bunch of stuff. The calculations are in the regs. Right now it says you can buy either compost or RNG. Most agencies do not use the amount of compost and RNG that is generated by these. It will require purchasing more than you need. It's silly. Hopefully they will give us other options for things to purchase. But it is being placed on local agencies to do this. In addition, at least 75% of your paper products, not just printed paper or writing paper, but all of your paper products need to be recycled content. The hard part of that is documenting it. How many P card holders do you have in your agency that purchase paper? Okay, you're also going to have to adopt a number of ordinances and policies, and there's a number of ordinances and policies that you're not allowed to adopt. I'm not going to go into all of those details right now. The good news is CalRecycle is working on a contract, the RFP is actually out right now, to get support around developing model ordinances, model franchise language, and hopefully local agencies will have some help around this. It's not that scary though. Most of the provisions that they're asking for are in most municipal codes, and what you need to add is the mandatory participation in the enforcement requirements. Okay, so this is going to cost more, right? What we've seen, depending on the agency and sort of where you're starting from, you're looking at anywhere from a 5 to a 50% rate increase to implement these services. How that gets applied, it will differ by agencies, but pretty much everybody's going to be looking at increasing rates. Pretty much everybody's going to be looking at some charges for recycling and organic service. Now that the mandate is in place, it won't be as essential to have deep pricing incentives. Local agencies, in order to recover their costs, will probably implement SB 1383 fees or adjust their franchise fees. That'll depend on your attorney's read of the Jacks versus Santa Barbara case. And in order to comply with Cal Green requirements that are in SB 1383, you may need to adopt C&D administrative fees or deposit systems. Okay, so what are folks doing? We were working with Santa Cruz County as the governor was signing SB 1383. We thought we were done with the negotiation. We weren't. We now needed to plan for this because we didn't want this to be a massive contract reopener. At that point, all we had was prior laws, the legislation, and an idea of where CalRecycle was going with the regs, so we really had to do some crystal ball work here. We did a pretty good job. We provided a 3-cart system for all. We provided for de minimis exemptions, although Santa Cruz may get rid of those. We provided food recycling service for multifamily and commercial on day one. The county's building a new compost facility that would be able to handle the yard trimmings and food scraps from residential. It's too large of a volume to go where they're sending the multifamily stuff. So that is at a future option. We'll add food scraps at no cost. So we did anticipate the programmatic requirements pretty well. Education and outreach, there's extensive media requirements, and they're fairly flexible about what the messaging is. So we believe that they will be able to comply with that. We also provided for additional staffing. We knew that the outreach and the compliance monitoring on this was going to be a big lift. So there's 2 FTEs for the hauler, 2 FTEs for the county. I think that's a trend you're going to see where this responsibility is shared a little bit more. The county already had a mandatory recycling ordinance. It will be modified to add food as a covered material. We added hauler regulations. They had a large number of gray market haulers that were not regulated. Those folks now have to provide organics and recycling service and have to provide reporting. Santa Cruz County has one of the oldest food rescue systems in California. We wanted to protect that. We created a franchise exemption for it and then provided for food rescue to be included in their outreach. And we provided funding. They have dedicated funding in their agreement over $1 million a year to build and operate a compost facility. Okay, so that was the first one we did. Sorry for all of my clients in the room that were in the middle. San Ramon's the last one that we have done under this. It was a competitive process. It will implement in October of 2019. Good luck to all the people in the room that are working on that. It's going to be we had a better idea in this case of what was going on. We had the May draft of the regs last year, and so we were able to make this a little bit more precise. They're going to provide a universal rollout, 3 containers for all customers on day one. That was a choice that City Council made. They knew that that was advancing the state requirement, but they wanted to get a leg up on this. We've provided a flexible outreach plan. It's a budget-based program so that the city and the hauler can work each year to meet whatever requirements there are within that budget. Tracy Bills did the budget estimate on that for me and all the public education requirements, so I hope she was right. Technical assistance, again, 4.5 FTEs between the city and the hauler. Each of them have some resources, and there are different roles for each of them. The hauler has a contamination monitoring and a contamination fine program in the contract that they can implement. We've got 2,000 cubic yards per year of compost or mulch that can go to the city that will help to fulfill that purchasing requirement. There's a franchise exemption for rescued and donated food. We actually asked for proposals from the haulers about this, and all 4 proposers in this process basically said we could provide some financial support and some outreach support, but there are other folks that are much better to do this, and so we sort of left it that way. It will be part of the outreach, but it's not a service through the agreement. And then there are increased rates. Their rates are going up about 30%. There will be charges for recycling and organics. Those are regulated now. And they've got an SB 1383 fee in there to fund the city's obligations. 24 seconds left. So here's what you need to do next. Really, you can't get started too soon on this. And if you do not have organics processing capacity for all of the material that your community generates, you need to start on that now. It's taking a huge amount of time to build those facilities. There are a few under planning and development right now, but they're taking 3 to 6 years. So, ready for questions? Whew.
Yeah, what chance is it that the regulations, Arthur Boone again, the questions, the regulations that are currently in draft, what's the likelihood that they will survive in their present format to adoption?
I'm not a professional handicapper on that, but, I think largely the boulders of their plan and the regulation that are there are going to stay in place. I think what you're going to see is some shifting in some details, things like labeling requirements, how frequently you're doing the route reviews, how frequently you're doing the incompatible material limit tests at facilities, what exactly is going to be required in reporting. So I think the changes are going to be around the edges at this point. I think the main structure is there. Some of you know there are challenges forming to this in the legislature that some folks are interested in trying to repeal, so that's a risk, but I think it's a small one.
So this might be a question for Tracy, but I'm curious. I'm up here, way up here. Hi. In setting the San Ramon budget at $200,000, what were you looking at in terms of outreach? What mechanisms are you using? Mailers, marketing and advertising, et cetera?
It was incredibly comprehensive, and if the mic can go over to Tracy, she could respond perhaps a little bit more, but it was a multimedia approach. They budgeted it out, both the initial and the ongoing requirements in terms of the types of pieces that would be produced, from posters to mailers to postcards to social media to bot media. So it was pretty expansive, and they costed it out at a pretty tight level of detail. And again, it was tailored to San Ramon's customer base and number of commercial businesses versus residential and all that kind of stuff.
Hi. So you mentioned with the county of San Ramon that a third party is going to be taking care of all the food rescue portion of the requirement of the SB 1348. So is part of the plan to help fund these organizations who are doing the food rescue, or just kind of say it's up to you?
So in the two case studies, in the Santa Cruz County example, the food rescue organizations that exist there actually get a fair bit of support from the county already. And so we really just needed to get out of their way and make sure that through the outreach, we were supporting them that way. In San Ramon, we looked at a number of different avenues, and the city is going to implement their food rescue program separate from the franchise. The real sort of decision making was the franchise should not be the core service provider around that. They should be more supportive. And so the city's still in development on what they'll do.
So is that going to be different from city to city as far as who takes on the food rescues?
Yeah, and I'm not the strongest person on food rescue in the room. I'm sure there are others that could speak to this some, but what we're finding as we're doing 1383 plans for agencies is these food rescue organizations tend to be fairly localized within a region at least. And so they're serving more affluent areas and distributing the rescued food typically to other areas nearby that are more disadvantaged. And so there is this sort of regional network, doesn't really respect county or city lines, but there seems to be a robust network of folks doing this work.
On your left, over here. So you said that this is contingent on having to purchase the organic waste products, right? So are there incentives for those RNG capture anaerobic digesters like the ones at Blue Line from like small to larger scale being rolled out in conjunction?
Yeah, there are grants through CalRecycle, through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund program that they've been issuing over the last few years. Their allocations haven't been all that consistent. And then there's money through the California Energy Commission for projects particularly that are producing vehicle fuel.
Thanks, Rob.
All right. Thank you.